Okay.
Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce, how you doing?
Hey, David, I'm doing all right today. How about yourself?
Good. It's a beautiful day out there, give or take a million mosquitoes in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a bad mosquito season in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and it hasn't been bad this year.
Not really. It's been good, actually.
The last few days, man. Oh.
Yeah, they're out voracious. I was beginning to worry about the food chain there for a while, and then I realized, yeah, we're still in it.
As long as there's mosquitoes.
We're part of it.
We are. We're doing our bit, pulling our weight.
Yeah.
It's the great circle of life, Bruce.
Yeah. So anyway.
Hakuna Matata, my friend. All right, Bruce. We don't have a lot to talk about, is the truth, but we are going to talk about a few things, starting with some Oilers prospects. Bruce, why don't we kick it off? I did a post recently. Let me just find that on the NHL Network, and this kind of relates to a post that you also worked on about the paucity of the Oilers system, and the Oilers, the NHL Network, which I think it was mainly Sam Cosentino who did the list, but EJ Hradek also worked on it. They did the top 50 prospects, NHL prospects, and they go by a definition. They go by the rule book definition. If you know anyone who's played less than 25 NHL games is under the age of 25 is counted on their list. And they did not have. They had zero. They had not one Edmonton prospect.
Out of top 50, was it?
In the top 50, not.
You'd expect 1.5, right?
What's that?
You'd expect 1.5. You'd rather have two, but you expect to have at least one out of 50.
Yeah, and
all things being equal.
And they didn't have what's his name, Schaefer, the guy the Oilers traded away this past year in order to acquire Matthias Ekholm, which was interesting. I thought Reed Schaefer would have been on such a list in the top 50 prospects, because the Oilers got pretty good value in terms of getting Matthias 3.5 years of Matthias, put it this way, 4 playoff seasons out of Matthias Ekholm in that trade. I mean, they gave up a low first-round draft pick this year, and Schaefer had a pretty good year with Seattle, but he wasn't on the top 50 list either. What do you make of it, Bruce? Is it a big deal? Should anyone be attacking Tyler Wright, the head Oilers scout, that he's not doing his job? What say you?
I'm not sure how much of a chance he's got to do his job, in the sense that so many of the Oilers picks get traded away every year. You know, they go into the draft with 3 or 4 picks, and typically they have one. Usually they have one in the first round. This year they didn't have that. And then the second round pick is gone, the third round pick is gone, the fourth round pick is gone. But guess what? We got 2 picks in the 6th round. And that, so they've really been picking a lot of, I think, what was it? 14 of their last 21 picks were in the bottom 75 as opposed to the top 150 or something like that. It was a clear majority in the bottom third of the draft, the picks that the Oilers do make. So that said, I mean, he's not Broberg.
Came the year, the summer, the July
after. Holloway and Borgo, and I guess you can say Schaefer's on him, although, at this point I really don't care if Schaefer's on the list or not, because he's gone. But none of them has exploded off the charts. But how many players do? We're talking about number 14, number 22, number 32. I mean, Schaefer is still, in junior hockey.
Here's the quick list, Bruce, of the players that you've drafted that have the highest kind of ceiling right now, that are still, there's positive buzz about. Yep. So he's had the 4 drafts. He was not involved in the Philip Broberg draft.
Right.
That's on someone else, whether you like it or you hate it. But so his reputation, Tyler Wright's reputation, will be based on Dylan Holloway, 14th overall, 2020. Carter Savoy, 100th that same year, 100th overall. Tyler Tullio, 126th, and Maxime Berezhkin, 138th that same year. Xavier Bourgault, 22nd, 2021. Luka Munzenberger, 90th in 2021. Matt V. Petrov, 180th in 2021, and Maximus Wanner, 212th in 21. Then there's the Schaefer pick, 32nd overall in 2022. Nikita Yasayev, 190th overall in 2022, and Bo Akey, 56th overall in 2023. That's a lot of low picks to be judging them on. But there's a lot of hope. There's always a lot of hope with drafted players. But with players like Wanner, Petrov, Tullio, Berezhkin to some extent. There's a lot of Bourgault he had an okay year, I think, in the AHL last year. And Holloway, if Holloway hadn't been injured, he might be a regular in the NHL right now. He had the broken thumb, which required 2 surgeries. So this is the thing. It's the hardest thing in the world is to rate these guys, because it takes, it's usually 2 or 3 years after they've had 5 years at the helm that you can really get a sense of what they did. So, we can all recall Stu McGregor, the magnificent bastard, right? He was viewed as this great finder of talent. And there was tons of hope around some of the drafts that he had. I think the 2010
draft in particular.
Yeah, Pidlick and Curtis Hamilton and
Ryan Martindale, Brandon Davidson. There was a lot of guys that year, and some of them could play,
It's just
Pitlick's still playing.
It's this weird thing where it's almost like the second you get a sense that the scout isn't doing well, you got to fire him and bring in somebody else. I mean, my take on it, and I've looked at this extensively, is I think even the very, very best scouts, like the guy who was so great in Detroit and Barry Fraser in Edmonton, they've got a short shelf life. This is a really hard job. And I think people are good at it tops for about 4 or 5 years. And then you should be clearing house and bringing in new scouts, because it seems like a job which is really suited to young, hungry, aggressive scouts who really work their butts off and looking to make a name for themselves. That's my particular take. So, move Tyler Wright into some other job in the organization. Like, you shouldn't. I just think you should do that job for about 4 or 5 years and then move on anyway, because there's very few people who do it brilliantly for a decade or for 20 years. So,
yeah, maybe you could have a new, you have these player development positions. You could make a scout development position and kick your head scout up into that higher job.
Yeah.
Do if he doesn't deserve to get, flat out let go. But Barry Fraser, he was at the helm for the Oilers for, I think, 21 years, from 1979 through 2000, or I can't remember the 2000 draft. I think he left when Sather left.
Yeah.
It was, anyway, for the good of the Oilers, the best thing that could have happened was that Barry Fraser had been raptured in about 1986. Because he would have had this reputation then, deservedly, which he still has, of having the greatest run of coaching or scouting and drafting in the history of the NHL draft, which he then spent the next 15 years largely sullying with a very mediocre to poor draft record from his villa in Mexico.
Yeah. You said raptured, like taken up into heaven, not raptured, eaten by a giant lizard?
No, raptured.
Okay,
raptured. No, it's similar, I guess, but
I've never
taken
heard that.
Taken from on high, either way, I guess. But
I've never heard that word used in that way.
Oh.
I know what the rapture. I've heard of the rapture, but I've never heard of raptured. Anyway, yeah, he deserved to go to hockey heaven. He was a god. There's no one who's had a better draft record, I don't think, than Barry Fraser in those first years with the Oilers. It was just unparalleled. And Ken Holland and the Detroit Red Wings faced the same thing. They had a group of scouts in the 90s who were just unbelievably good. And then they kept those same scouts through the 2000s, early 2000s for a decade. And they just kept drafting dud after dud after dud. Now they were in the same position. They were trading away a lot of draft picks. They were missing first round draft picks. But the players they did draft, I think the only one that worked out was Johan Franzen. Like the rest of them they just lost it. And that's the story of Ken Holland's demise in Detroit, was the fact he had fantastic scouts early on, and then he kept those same scouts forever, and they all lost it in terms of their ability to get out there on the road and identify talent. So we don't know where the Oilers are right now in this cycle, where Tyler Wright's going to be, and we're not going to know for a couple of years. There's a chance, like if players like Petrov and Wanner, like you only need 2 or 3 of these guys to become good players for us to be saying in 2 or 3 years that Tyler Wright did his job very well. He identified some good talent. Like let's say Holloway.
Players there. I liked what I saw at the dev camp, and the guys that grabbed my eye were all triple-digit draft picks. And the reason is this: that's all the Oilers have had. Literally, last 4 drafts, they've had 5 picks that were double digits, and all the rest were in the triples. That's 4th round and beyond, where you're getting into pretty iffy territory every year. So it's a thing. When you do it multiple years in a row, it becomes a deficit.
I listed 11 players in that list that I read out to you about the Oilers draft picks. Let's say 4 of them become capable NHLers. I mean, if that happens, he will have done his job, especially considering where they drafted. I think, in the draft range they were at. If they can pull a player out of every draft who can help become let's say a core 12 player in the NHL, I mean, that would be, then he would have done a superlative job. Then he would have aced it. But, so we will see. It is a little early to tell. We are going through these prospects now, and we are looking at them one by one. Bruce, you looked at the 15th player on our list, Jake Chason, who was drafted. He was drafted in the 4th round. What was your takeaway from digging into his story and 4th round draft picks and how they usually do?
Yeah. I wound up writing a little bit about Jake Chason and more about sort of the history of the players of his ilk and the kind of odds that they have to overcome in making it. And Jake Chason himself, there's lots to like about him. I saw him at Dev Camp. He looked all right. I saw him. Unfortunately, I was at the training camp scrimmage 2 years ago, his first camp, that he left with a shoulder injury, and it basically cost him 2/3 of his season. And this was after only playing 20 games the prior season because of COVID. They had that super short WHL season that didn't have any playoffs, I don't think. And then so last year the hope was he'd just get to play a full season. And he did. Mind you, he played half of it on a really bad team in Brandon, and then the other half on a pretty good team in Saskatoon. And he scored at more or less the same rate that he's always scored. And that, to me, that's a concern. You want to see a guy like that ramping it up. And last year, when you wrote the post on him, you were suggesting he might be good for 80 or 90 points this year. And instead, he played 70 games and he got 58 points. And you look at his game log and you see some real nice stretches. And then there are other stretches. There was one where he had 1 assist in 8 games, and other one, no points at all in 5 games. Now, if you're a semi-dominant 19-year-old in that league, you got to be producing better than that. And so that's a concern, and that's something to watch as he turns pro. And there's still a question. Some people still say, Jake Chason, he hold him back, right, in junior for 1 more year. And you can't slide his contract, but have him play as an overager. And I just don't see it, because for all that, two of the seasons that he played were really short, 20 games. He was in that environment for 4 years, right? And then he gradually got to the point where he's the dominant age of physical guys. Like 6'3", they're listening to 6'3" now in the Oilers, I noticed, 6'2" in other places. And Dev Camp said 6'3", and strapping young lad, right? And so now I think the step for him is to join the professional ranks. After he's where Curtis Hamilton was when he turned pro. Sending him back to junior made no sense, because he already been there, done that. Give him a new thing, and even if the new challenge turns out to be ECHL in 23, 24. If he's there and playing minutes against men, that's a step. It's, he's not going to be in the NHL next year or the year after. By the end of his ELC, he's doing well. If he had, it's got a call up and a look-see for a while, where he makes them have to make a decision when his contract gets to the fourth year, where Lavoie is now, where he's kind of forcing them because of where his, and it'll take that long, I would suspect, for this player, but I wouldn't be super shocked if he made it. But, the odds say there's only a handful of percent of players picked from down that low in the triple digit range of the draft, let's call it, because I looked at the fourth round and I looked at the fifth, sixth, and seventh combined, just who's the best player in the season that was picked in that spot. And it wasn't exactly list burgeoning with superstars. There's a lot of pretty good players there, and they're all players that you'd recognize when you see who they are today, guys that took a few years to make their way up and make their presence felt, and they're still getting better. And that's the kind of guy that makes it out of that lot, is the guy that keeps improving into his late 20s, frankly.
Well, Bruce, there were two superstars on the list. You looked at the McDavid era of fourth round draft picks, and there's one superstar, Kirill Kaprizov, and then there's a really good player in Jesper Bratt of New Jersey. So there's two players. It's just like, wow, did you ever? Let's be honest. You got lucky. You nailed it, but you also got lucky.
Yeah, 100%.
Because
like the odd one of those.
Yeah, and then there's 3 or 4 other guys who are real good, solid. Maybe even core 12 players, like Ross Colton is a core 12 player.
Well, they're paying him like one now.
Yeah, maybe Drake Batherson. Drake Batherson's probably been core 12. And so there's some good players. Matthias Michelli, we'll see how he continues to develop, if he continues to develop. And, it's always a little, with players like that on a really bad team, you always wonder if he had a good season this year, but we'll see if he can continue. But it seems like there's about 2 players a year from the McDavid era drafted in the fourth round who have made it in the NHL so far. That might go up a little bit, but it's not a lot of players. And it's just a reminder. At some point, like when you're a teenage hockey fan, you're looking at it and you're looking at the draft, and at some point you realize, man, like making the Western Hockey League, it's one thing to make the Western Hockey League. It is another thing to make the NHL. It is such a steep pyramid, and there's probably maybe one guy on average on each Western Hockey League team that's got an NHL future. Is it even that high? One guy, well, because it's covering, that's 4 years. That's probably maybe 1 or 2 guys on that, there's 16 to 20-year-olds on a WHL team. Right. So it is a small number of players on those WHL teams, and even players on those teams who get drafted. It's still a small number. It's just 2 guys out of 30, 3 guys out of 30 drafted in the fourth round. Who are going to make it, and it's not easy. So Chase on, the arrows aren't up right now on him because he didn't progress as a scorer like you'd hope to see in major junior hockey. But if he's going to make the NHL, he's going to have to make it probably in a different way. He's going to have to figure out how to be a super solid defensive hockey player with a physical element to his game who can chip in the odd goal. And he's really got to define himself around those terms if he's going to make it. And that's hard for players who have been, high talent scoring players throughout their entire hockey careers to do, to become that kind of smart defensive hockey player is not easy, obviously, or they'd all be doing it. And but I do think that's his path to the NHL is if he sees himself as I could maybe make it as a third line checker, and I'm going to be doing everything I can to become a solid defensive player at this point. It's my whole focus. Everything else, I'm going to work on it, but my focus is defensive hockey.
Yep. I mean, to me right now, this guy is Tyler Pitlick in 2012. I mean, he's
Pitlick
a
was
little
kind of,
lower draft pedigree,
yeah.
obviously, but not that much lower in
Yeah.
that, day 2 draft pick. And it's all against the current for all those guys. And but the same sort of general skill set, big strapping, right shot, forward who can hit a little bit and hustles and I mean Pitlick never made the NHL as a great seer of the game. Offense. He had good offensive numbers in junior, but he was not that creative of a player. But he was a good enough, hard-working, two-way, physical type guy that he could find his spot somewhere in the depths of the roster, whatever team he was on, and that's um, upper limits for many of these guys. Is if they make the NHL at all, it's a huge success, even if they're a third or fourth liner in the end. Yeah.
And Tyler Pitlick
Yeah.
essentially played 4 years in the minors,
Mm-hmm.
and but he has carved out an NHL career. He's been he's traveled all over from Edmonton to Dallas to Philadelphia to Arizona to Calgary to Montreal to St. Louis. He was in St. Louis last year. He played 61 games. 16 points. So he's a fourth liner in energy player with the St. Louis Blues. I mean, he is having an NHL career, and
sure.
He'll keep playing it. I don't know where he's going to be this year, but if he can keep playing in Europe, so that actually was a pick that you could say worked out for the in terms of.
He was an NHL player. Yeah, they got really unlucky with Tyler in the sense that he kept getting hurt, and then. The year he finally made it, and he scored like 8 goals in 31 games, as I recall, in 16-17, the year the team broke out, and he was breaking out. And then he got hurt, and he missed the whole rest of the season. And because he got hurt and missed the whole rest of the season, he didn't make the threshold for games played, and it made him a Group 6 free agent. Otherwise, if he just played out the season, the Oilers would have had his rights for 2 more years. Instead, they lost him as a free agent. And, that was just he needed a change of scenery anyway, just for his luck to change. He had such tough breaks with the injuries, but he was a good kid. I got to know him when he was with Medicine Hat a little bit. Interviewed him a couple times, and always still root for him.
Bruce, the next player we're going to talk about is someone I just wrote about, and he has had a pretty interesting career so far in terms of development. His name is Noel Hoffenmeier, and he's like 6'1", 190 pounds, and he was a fourth round pick, 108th overall in the 2017 draft out of the Ottawa 67s. He had 40 points in 62 games as a defenseman, and he took a step back the next year in his offensive game in Ottawa. He had fewer points in his next year, and it turned out that the Arizona Coyotes didn't want to sign him. They had 2 years to sign him. When he was a 19 or 20-year-old in Major Junior, he had 62 points in 68 games. But that wasn't enough for Arizona to think they're going to sign him, and no other team drafted him. He went back in the draft. No other team drafted him, and he did go back for that extra year of junior when he was 21 years old, and he had 82 points in 58 games. The Toronto Maple Leafs then signed him.
Plus 52.
Yeah, plus 52. So that's what happens if you go back that final year. You just have quite an advantage that extra year. So he was signed by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he ended up the next 2 years mainly playing in the ECHL. He played some games. He was able to make the Toronto Marlboros for a couple games, their AHL team, but he was mainly with the Wichita Thunder and the Newfoundland Growlers of the ECHL for the next 2 years. At the end of his second pro year, he gets called up to the Toronto Marlboros again. So he's 2 years into his AHL or his minor pro experience. He's mainly been in the AHL. He gets called up to the Toronto Marlies. And something interesting happens, Bruce, and we remarked on this before, and I dug a little deeper into it. For the first time, he starts to get in fights. And he got in 2 fights at the end in 8 games at the end of that season with the Marlboros. And then he got in 6 fights last year, which is a lot of fights for a player in this day and age in hockey. So especially someone, you look at, so I went to hockeyfights.com. He had been in 1 fight before then, it looked like. I don't know if they found all his fights, but looked like he'd been in 1 fight before then. And all the time he'd been in hockey.
Has 2 odd numbers in his junior career, so I default to that likely being a fight, although it could be another kind of major, of course. But
yeah, 5-minute major. So he might have had 1 or 2 fights in major junior, but according to hockeyfights, I think .com had the record. Anyway, he starts to get in fights, and the interesting thing was they have links on that site to all the fights he got in.
Right.
And so I was really interesting about this, a player who hadn't fought, and suddenly he's getting in a lot of fights, and he got 114 penalty minutes, which is one of the second highest on his team.
In the league, or
that's what got our attention, because he also got so he stuck with the Marlboros this past year, and he got 38 points in 65 games. He was clearly their power play quarterback on that team, and he was getting in all these fights. So I looked at the fights, and it was really interesting. I think there was video for 5 of the 6 that I could get. And in 3 of those fights, he came to the aid of a teammate. One of his teammates got clobbered, and he jumped right in immediately and picked a fight, and actually generally beat up the guy a little bit, puffed him up pretty good, at least, the guy who had picked on his teammate.
Made him pay the price, did he?
Made him pay the price, as they say. And what struck me is you and I have been watching, and we've been watching AHL hockey on the internet off and on for more than a decade now. And there's so many players who have come and gone from the Oilers organization, Curtis Hamilton being a prime example, Martin Marincin, that's another good name, where I watch them and I think, if you added an element of aggression and abrasion to your game, you would be so much more valuable to an NHL team. If you became, for instance, the kind of player who came to the aid of a teammate after you got clobbered in a fight, and you picked a fight and you just stood up for him, that would put a glow around you, which is currently lacking. And if you threw more hits, if you threw, instead of 0 hits or 1 hit every 3 games, if you threw 1 hit every game, one solid hit every game, and 4 or 5 times a year you stood up for a teammate in a fight, that could mean the difference for you of making $500,000 in your hockey career or $10 million in your hockey career. If you could get, a few NHL contracts, and we see examples of this. The one I used in my story was Antoine Roussel, who we watched way back when in the AHL, and
he was always like that.
He was always. You're right. He was always. It's not something he added to his game, and maybe Vinny Desharnais is the same thing. Maybe he was always really abrasive, but it's this kind of player.
I've seen players learn it though, that they actually had it. Tyler Benson, not that it necessarily worked for him, but there's an example of a guy who literally changed his style to try and provide something they thought the team needed that he could do. And it wasn't like it came that naturally to him. I don't think. I think the attitude, yeah, but I think some of the physical stuff maybe. Anyway, I thought he came on that kind of late in the day. So it's possible for a player to say, I got to do something to get noticed. I know I'm going to beat up that guy in training camp.
Yeah, I mean, we've read stories like it was more commonly in the past where players like Dave Schultz, who said he wasn't a rough, tough guy early on in his career, consciously decided he was going to become the roughest, most violent player in hockey. And he was going to earn his keep in the NHL, Dave the Hammer Schultz, and he became the most, the most aggressive fighter of the
472 PIMs 1 year.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see what happens. This guy, the interesting thing to me is, Bruce, this guy clearly has some skill. He doesn't have elite NHL skill, but he probably has enough skill, I'm guessing, to play in the NHL in a bottom pairing role. Like if he keeps developing, I mean, he's put up points. He's played the power play in major junior. He's been a major power play guy. He put up points in the AHL last year. From the sounds of it, he's got a good shot. He's an okay skater. He can rush. He's good with the puck. And he's a sound defensive hockey player. Now he's added this other element to his game. So, there's lots of defensemen on the Oilers defense, the depth chart that are ahead of him, including a couple other really good puck moving players, Cam Dineen and Ben Gleason. There's also Marcus Niemelainen, who's just a physical player, a huge physical player. So there's lots of competition for him in the AHL even for playing time. But it wouldn't surprise me if he keeps doing what he's doing and stepping up and can play that, what wouldn't surprise me if he did get a call up, he might just look okay. He might hold his own in the NHL because, and it wouldn't surprise me that he got a call up based on the way he played last year in the AHL. It earned him an entry-level contract at age 23, which is unusual.
24,
that's 24. Usually they reserve those kind of contracts for players who are better prospects. But the Oilers have been giving out a few in recent years. They gave it to him, and they've given it to Desharnais, and they gave one to Hamblin, guys who have been minor in the AHL level. Mm-hmm. And we've seen both Hamblin and Desharnais in the NHL now.
We have.
And so in terms of where he's headed, this guy Hoffenmeier, I called him Hoff, where the Hoff is headed wouldn't be surprised to see him get a couple NHL games this year or next year if he stays in the organization, and then we'll get a good look at him ourselves.
Yeah, well, he's already 24 because he played junior right through age 21 in the OHL, and he left at just the right time because the next season the OHL didn't even play, but he played 298 games over 5 years. And then he's played in the ECHL, time in the AHL, full season in the AHL. And even though he's 24 and you think, oh, you don't want to waive that guy, they actually don't have to waive that guy because he's on the LC. Because Toronto, for all the time they had him, they never actually signed him to an NHL class contract. So it's not like they got him. Usually you get a guy that age, he's coming off another NHL contract somewhere else. And this guy isn't. So they can move him around at will. And I like this signing. I think this player's track record is good. I mean, anybody who played for the Newfoundland Grizzlies, man. I mean, Growlers. Pardon me, Newfoundland Growlers, the ECHL team that won. Was it Turner Cup a couple years ago when they were an expansion team? Yeah, when they were first year they were around. Anyway, Zach O'Brien, that team. Anyway, that aside, I mean, he's one of these slow, steady guys, and his record in Ottawa, 67s, 2 straight years, almost plus 100 for the 2 years with, scoring point a game, caliber scoring. This is a guy that's, you got to think he's comfortable with the puck on his stick.
Yeah.
And you want to think a defenseman like that who can make a pass out of his own end, and he's probably still going to be able to make one, whatever league he's going to. So anyway, I thought that was a good bet. And it's just a 1-year ELC because he's 24. That's all you're allowed to sign him to. The ELCs get shorter as the signing age gets later. 22 and 23, they get a 2-year deal. Anything 22 and under, they all get a 3-year deal. So most of the ELCs are 3 years.
Yeah, well, and it's we'd only see him in Edmonton, for instance, if the Oilers get hit with a lot of injuries on the blue line. But has that ever happened? Yeah, this year, and that didn't happen last year, but that happens all the time to teams. And I just think this was an excellent signing by the Oilers. Mm-hmm. I think they've got a player. Yeah, they've got a player here who has been developed by another organization, has shown a lot of promise in a number of different areas of the game. And I like this signing quite a bit. I think kudos to the pro scouts who recommended this signing because I think if we do see him, that he'll be okay. So
I remember when Toronto developed Craig Muni for us.
Yeah.
That was fun. They kind of gave him away when he was 23, was it, 24? And he just came here and immediately started winning Stanley Cups, something he never seemed to have done in Toronto. Just saying.
Did they develop Jason Smith too? Or
they did. He was, New Jersey, Toronto.
And Toronto. Yeah.
But
so that's
Yeah.
That'd be
Anyway,
nice.
be nice to, we're picking off all these players from the Leafs organization. It's spooky. It's like, I remember when Dallas Aikens came here and he brought in Ryan Hamilton and
Will
Acton.
Yeah.
Will Acton, the smell that wouldn't leave the room, Dallas Aikens said approvingly. that was the part I couldn't get over. Anyway.
Wrong coach at the wrong time for the Edmonton Oilers.
What's the connection between the Oilers and Toronto? And they got a zillion guys. Like I saw a picture from the golf tournament. There were 6 guys, and they were all from 6 different major towns in the Golden Horseshoe. Like Nurse was from Hamilton, and they had McDavid and Hyman and
Connor Brown, was he there?
Connor Brown, was he in the picture, I think?
What's his name?
Warren Fogle was in there. Ryan
yeah.
McLeod was in there. Evan Bouchard was in there. Like, they're all from that area. And the Oilers just seem to hit that market every summer when it comes to free agents, too, for whatever reason.
To give the Ontario credit, Bruce, there is no richer hockey development area on earth than the Golden Horseshoe. I mean, the number of players.
The competition is so good, eh?
Who have come and the coaching and the training, right? Yeah. Like they're doing a lot right in Southern Ontario and that Golden Horseshoe area. Man, it's just superstar after superstar. If you had a Team Canada, I bet you at least I'm going to say a third of the players are developed there, maybe more than that, come from that area on almost every Team Canada. So I give thanks to that area of the world for what the bounty of hockey players they provided to the Edmonton Oilers.
To the Oilers, the Oilers have extracted from there whatever it is from the natural resources of Canada coming west. We can at least say we got some of Ontario's resources playing for the Oilers now and in the system and pipeline too. So.
Well, Bruce, I got to run now, unfortunately. Yeah. So we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.